Assembly Member Kurten.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'd like to ask all of you actually about what you think about buses and bus accessibility. What progress has been made so far on improving bus accessibility, and do you think anything more needs to be done? So anyone like to start off with that?
Kick off. We think we've got the largest accessible bus network anywhere in the world. So 95% of London's bus stops are accessible, and we have a fleet of almost 10,000 buses that are all low floor and can kneel and provide spaces for both buggies as well as wheelchairs. You'll of course hear on the buses as well announcements, and you'll see visual displays for people who may have a sensory impairment, or even if you're just a visitor coming to London and want to know whether to get off at the next stop. So I think over the last 10 years we've made quite significant improvements in bus accessibility and the design of buses. As I touched on earlier, we have trained our bus drivers as well in terms of and how best to support customers. We've trained bus drivers to be able to manage some of the tensions in who should use that space, which is currently allocated for, and the priority should be wheelchair users, but sometimes people who have a pram are wanting to occupy that space. So bus drivers have learnt to broker and make decisions almost on behalf of customers, so that wheelchair users are always given priority. So I think we've made good progress when it comes to improving the accessibility of the bus network. And I should also add that, as I'm sure the committee will know, most trips by people who have a mobility impairment are made by buses. So we're less limited by the old infrastructure that we have on the underground, and so I think we've done what we can on the buses, because we've updated the kind of rolling stock now and our vehicles.
I think we understand and accept that, but I think the anecdotal evidence from a vast majority of people that use buses and are members across London is that in reality the application of things that are in the Big Red Book, both for those who work under the TfL service and the other licences that are given by TfL, is that drivers quite often don't know the rules. They don't understand that they mustn't stop if there's someone at the bus stop. So if a visually impaired person is there, they don't necessarily know the bus is coming. Buses don't always stop for them, which is one of the things that they're supposed to do. They don't really understand how to make the bus kneel, or where they have to kneel in terms of being on the side of the road. They will often leave a disabled person to languish and to themselves express their own needs to 20 people squashed into the wheelchair space. And when our members are asking for support, there's quite often a challenge with the bus driver. We're not going to make a comment on as to why that is, but sometimes it's just people not doing a very good job, as in any part of the country. But we don't believe that there is really enough of an impetus on bus drivers to do a good job in terms of disabled people. It's an add-on, it's an addition. That's the way that most of our members feel. And again, my concern is that there's a high level of gratitude from disabled people when they have a good opportunity, something good happens, example, a good experience, sorry, is the word I'm looking for. I'm not grateful when I have a good experience. It's my expectation. And that's where we need to get to. So our members feel that they're not being catered for in the way that they should be. And when they are, it's rarer than it should be.
Yeah. The TfL, do you want to respond to that?
I think that variability is concerning and is unacceptable, where people have a poor experience on buses. And of course, some people from time to time won't respond in the way they ought to make sure that someone's journey is a good one on the bus network. But we have really invested in the training of bus drivers to improve the customer experience. Also, we know that when it comes to looking at slip, trips and falls on buses, you're more likely to have a slip, trip and fall if you are a more vulnerable bus user, or you're an older bus user as well. So we have worked with all of our contracted bus providers. There are regular accessibility focused sessions at the bus depots, and it's something that we constantly try to improve kind of month on month, and we have a lead in the bus team who is responsible for this.
I'm going to pick up that point, Cindy, because we run a lot of those sessions in the bus garages. A lot of our members do individually. And again, as we alluded to at the beginning, yes, it's great that we're having that one-to-one lived experience conversation, but we're not paid for it. It quite often happens when there's been a problem and everyone goes, panics, oh, quick, come in and talk to us then. It's not something that is part of a planning, of a procedure, in the way that you would teach somebody about health and safety, you teach them how to turn the bus on. I don't believe, and I can evidence this through looking at the process of the training and the management of bus drivers, that access is seen as an integral part of what you do. It isn't yet. It is starting to be, but our experience is that process is still often reactive to a problem happening. That's my feedback statement.
We still have examples of bus garages where the idea of accessibility training is to put somebody in a wheelchair. To put a bus driver in a wheelchair and pretend that that's the lived experience, or to put on a blindfold and pretend that that's the lived experience. It's less common than it was, but the fact that it still happens at all is just shocking. The other thing I would say is that a bus is 65 seats or whatever it is, but it's one seat for me. So if there's a wheelchair or a walker or a buggy, that's it. I don't get on. So that's particularly bad during periods of disruption or during rush hour. Now, this isn't I can squeeze onto a bus, it's I don't travel.
Yeah, so, I mean, there seems to be a disconnect between what you're saying and what you're saying. So, I mean, how are you going to take those comments on?
No, I think what you're saying is happening is correct. I just think it's not happening in a way so I don't think what you're saying is wrong statement. It is happening, but it's not happening in a way that is absolutely integral. It's often reactive to an issue. It's asking disabled people to come in and do the jobs of the organisation for free. That's my opinion. And it's not done in a way whereby if the bus drivers then don't enact the things they've been told, there are consequences. You know, I know there are issues at TFL, and we do work with your team, and that actually sometimes there are consequences, but you can't tell us, and then we can't tell our members, which is slightly frustrating. So no, I don't think we're speaking from different places. I just think the reality is slightly different than it might look as a project on the ground.
I mean, I've got to be fair. There are commendations. Disabled people do identify the bus drivers that are particularly good, particularly proactive, that defuse situations. So we do have some stunning bus drivers, but at the other end of the scale, we also have some dreadful ones.
Right. So there's very good practice, but not everyone is up to the best standards. So I'm sure that we'll be trying to make the training, make sure everyone gets to those good standards. But look, just moving on a little bit. I mean, that's bus accessibility. But what about bus stops? I mean, you mentioned earlier, obviously, real-time information is very important, and we saw that on the video that we had. But are there any other small changes that could be made to infrastructure at bus stops and also stations as well, that could improve people's experiences of using them? What does anyone think about that? Any other things that we haven't mentioned already?
There's a couple of points that I'd make. One is about this accessibility standard. So it's all very well having the standard, but sometimes you get street lights, rubbish bins, just advertising poles. They're positioned badly, so it's very hard for the driver to stop in a place where both the front and the back doors are accessible. So I'm not sure that those standards have been thought about. The other thing to think about is there are still, across London, pockets of hail and ride where there are no bus stops. There is no timetable. the bus can't get to the curb. How do I get on and off? You know, we need to eliminate those existing routes.
Yeah, thanks. What might be the impediments to bringing in those changes? I mean, are they maybe TfL can answer them? They seem to be quite simple changes to make. Are there things that you're thinking about, or are there things that are preventing those changes from being made?
I think it goes back to the previous point in many ways. So we have 95% of accessible bus stops. We have a fully accessible bus service. So in a way, on paper, you know, we've done it. We're there, really. But that doesn't mean that that's the lived experience. And I think what's really important for us is to keep that dialogue with stakeholders so we can understand where it's going wrong and try and pick up those problems where we find them. Because the kind of the network-wide approach, I think, is there, but that doesn't mean that those pockets don't exist or that, you know, examples of bad experience don't exist that we can deal with as we come across them. So I think that's a big part of our kind of ongoing engagement with people, to understand the lived experience of what it's like on the network. And I think signage, communication, real-time information, again, is just really key to those kind of small interactions that mean that you know what you're up against before you get there. So that's a kind of, I think that's an ongoing journey for us to make sure that things work as smoothly as we want them to.
I mean, we have to be quite relentless. And we don't take our foot off the pedal because being a bus driver is an incredibly challenging role. It's an incredibly dynamic environment, and at times it's incredibly stressful too. So we bring back customer insights, customer feedback, speak to the operators, provide different types of training. We're about to go out to tender to provide very focused disability reports training for our bus drivers, because where we've got pockets of good practice, that's great, but there are, up to almost 20,000, I think, bus drivers who work across the network. So we have to be pretty relentless, and I would say that we are, just to complement the buses that are fully accessible. So we take it very seriously.
But one final thing, if I may, I'm a fairly savvy transport user. Our members are fairly savvy. They know that they can come to us, they can go to TfL. I think the issue that you've got is the people that aren't savvy. How do they know how to report their experience? How do you identify the person that doesn't use the bus because they are scared, unknowledgeable? I don't know how you do reach out to them, but there's a definite need to identify those people, get them using the networks.
Thanks.
One of the things we identified through the consultation that we did through the Railway for Everyone is one of the key barriers to people using the railway, so not buses in this instance, but the railway, is a lack of awareness of what the processes are and what the assistance is that's available. So one of the key things that we do need to improve on across the transport sector is making people aware of what the assistance is, how do they book assistance, what do they do if things go wrong, who do they talk to, what's available. I think in terms of communication of information and what information could we provide on buses, again, communication of information is one of the key things and one of the key barriers that people we talk to saw for using the railway and using transport. And I think aspirationally, one of the things that would be really good for us to start looking at is how do you provide information on one form of transport about the next mode of transport. So if you're on a bus, do you know where your train's going from and if it's going to be on time? And if you're getting off a train at a London terminal, do you know if the underground's running smoothly or if there's significant roadworks or disruption outside the station? And I think that's, while we shouldn't stop trying to get to kind of existing standards and levels of information provision, I think we also need to keep on looking at what the next step is as well.
And just to build on that, not to think that we have all of the answers ourselves within our organisation too. So the work that has been done to open source data, to get third-party developers to make better use of the information, to then be able to provide kind of wayfinding, near-time updates. That's incredibly important in our view around in the accessibility space, because there are lots of innovations both in the UK and also in other parts of the world that might significantly help to improve people being able to make a planned journey. So we'll continue to pull out the information and update our website and the TfL Go app, but we also need to, through our innovation team, work very closely to spark off, I would say, those innovation challenges, to have third-party developers come and help us make our customers' experiences a lot better.
Okay. Thanks. I'll just finally move on to talk about and ask you about taxis, because of course all taxis in London are wheelchair accessible. What about taxi ranks, and what progress has been made on improving the accessibility of taxi ranks? Maybe TfL can answer that again.
Yeah, so there are no national criteria for what constitutes an accessible taxi rank, which is part of what's difficult. And I think the value of taxis and them being fully accessible is that they offer the curb-to-curb service, which obviously means that you don't know necessarily where they're going to stop. So I think what's really important is the vehicles are accessible, they have the ramp, the drivers are fully trained, so we should be able to offer that accessible service to anybody who's using them, but that doesn't necessarily constitute a kind of accessible rank, if you like.
Yeah,
So taxis are not 100% accessible.
No.
well, I'm talking about the black taxis.
Yeah, they're not either.
They're not for all wheelchairs.
I can't use a black taxi. I'm too tall. And a lot of the people that I know are also too tall. So whilst they are the most accessible form of taxi, they're not 100% accessible.
Does that include the new taxi? The new
It does, yes.
Perfect ones. That's interesting.
The new ones are better than the old ones, but they're still not perfect.
Okay, but is that? I mean, that's for you specifically because of your using too tall. Okay.
But I know a lot of people. You know, as a population, we are growing in stature. So that problem is increasing, not decreasing.
Okay.
One thing I would say about stopping black taxis on the street, one of the consequences of cycle lanes is wheelchairs getting from the pavement across the cycle lane to the taxi. Or indeed, if it's a single lane road, the taxi stops to load the wheelchair user and it blocks the road. So there are unintended consequences that we need to consider.
And something being physically accessible doesn't make it accessible necessarily, because there may be attitudinal barriers. They might not want to pick up a wheelchair user because it takes ages in their opinion. It doesn't, by the way, including on buses. There is some research on that it increases waiting times. You might not know how to clip somebody in. So although something has been built to be accessible, it's a bit like if you don't know how to use it, they're not going to use it. So actually, again, the lived experience is that they're not. Some people literally can't fit in them, and other people are not given access to them because the person inside that vehicle doesn't necessarily want to let them in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think most of the time taxi drivers do a very, very good job and are very aware of these things. But,
yeah, we do, and our experience is the same. And we work with private hire vehicle companies, and we've been in contact with the black cabs. That's true, but the point I make, David, is that tagline, 100% accessible, isn't true, and it's more complex than it appears to be, and it's something that we have to challenge every day.
Okay, right.
And I think that's fair. So they're wheelchair accessible, but they don't take all types of wheelchair. They take most, but not all. So I think we acknowledge that.
Yeah, I mean, every cab can take a wheelchair, but not every kind of wheelchair.
Yeah, and all drivers are trained, so they should all know how to do that. But again, acknowledge that there will be times when that's not perfect, and we would urge you to contact us and let us know when that happens so that we can look into it.
I mean, one of the things that taxi drivers are concerned about is not being able to have access to all the roads in London as sort of changes come in. You mentioned cycles, superhighways, and there's the sort of situation in Tottenham Court Road where the road's being narrowed and they're not going to have 24/7 access as they had before. I mean, that is a big problem. Are you planning to change that in any way so that taxis can continue to have the maximum access to all roads in London? Because that's really necessary for wheelchair users that use taxis.
Yes, I think the Mayor's transport strategy, to implement the Mayor's transport strategy and to achieve our objectives, there will be changes to the road layout in London. That is going to happen. I think what's really important and what we do is engage with stakeholders when we're doing it, particularly with disability groups, to understand what those access needs are. And then through engagement and identifying through quality impact assessments what the impacts are, we can identify mitigations. And then through consultation, for example, on Tooley Street, then you do listen and adjust as that needs to happen.
No, I do understand with Tooley Street. I mean, that's something that I asked the Mayor about a lot, and he's continued to allow taxis to use Tooley Street, which is great. But that didn't happen with Tottenham Court Road, for example. The opposite's happened there. So that's a problem. So, I mean, it's just, it doesn't always
I think that
happen
was a decision with the
that
borough
way.
as well. So that was
Sorry?
Tottenham Court Road was Camden.
Yeah, it was, but there's also, you know, it's supported by the Mayor's transport strategy as well. So, I mean, it's just something that's, you know, needs to be thought about, I think. Anyway, okay, thank you. Yeah,
If I
sorry.
just add a little extra. I mean, so black taxis are vital for disabled people. Disabled people, it costs around £500 a month more to live as a disabled person. So if you're using black taxis and the taxi can't take the direct A to B route, they've got to route round some ULEZ zone or some no-go area, that puts up the cost to the disabled person. But it may push them out of their taxi card allowance. So it cuts down on the journeys they can take. It has a serious impact.
Specifically on taxis, they're not included in the ultra-low emission zone with the congestion charge. They wouldn't have to route around those to avoid a charge.
So I was thinking particularly of the closures in the city that they have to route round.
Yeah,
That
I think road closures
has
are just in
to
terms of those schemes.
I'd just like to add just really quickly also, and people aren't always cited on this, but certainly in relation to private taxis, less so black cabs, where individuals don't pick somebody up who is in a wheelchair, they refuse to pick somebody up who is in a wheelchair, and they're able to, we will prosecute people because we take it incredibly seriously if people are trying to get around and they are being refused a service that they should be able to access. So this is something that we do often in response to concerns raised by disabled people who want to use a taxi. It's not always, we don't always talk about those prosecutions, but just to give a sense and a flavour of how seriously we take disabled customers' needs.